Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the InnerFight podcast. I hope you're having a fantastic week. I hope you have a few minutes to do me a favor, and whatever platform you're listening to the show on, please give us a rate, give us a review, say something nice about us. If you're here, you're obviously enjoying what we're talking about, so say something nice about us on some platform or share the show. I'd really appreciate that, and it helps the show grow. The show is not full of ads. The show will not ever be full of ads, but the more people we can touch makes the show bigger and better. Please and thank you. As I said, I hope you've had a great week, and I hope you're ready for this week's show. In this week's show, I speak to a guy who's become a good friend, a very good cycling friend, which there is a difference between a friend and a cycling friend, Olly Higgens. And we are talking all about why we give up, what makes us give up, decision-making processes, purpose. We spoke about purpose with Jeff a few weeks ago, but Olly touches on it a little bit as well. And we also try and link quite a lot of theory into practice by sharing one of Olly's recent, quite incredible cycling journeys as well, where he started out basically playing an infinite game. Those that have listened to the show might have heard me speak before about Simon Sinek, The Infinite Game, a great book. And a lot of what we speak about in this show is a little bit related to the infinite game as well. I won't spoil it all. Olly's a great guy. He's got some awesome thoughts. And this was really a cool conversation. I've listened to it twice, so it must be half decent. This week's announcements. Yes, I'm back from Vienna, a weekend running the Vienna City Marathon with Steph and Ladies Run Club. There are over a dozen of them over there. And the reason I mention it is it's quite unique to see a dozen ladies travel from Dubai to Europe to run a marathon or half marathon as they did. Very inspiring on a number of levels, and shows that maybe sport, running, fitness, getting out of breath is not quite so bad when you add a little bit of tourism to it. Although I definitely prefer to run a marathon than tour the sights of Vienna. I've been there before, so I didn't do them this time that I went. But super awesome trip. If you do get a chance to go on a trip that has sport involved, I highly recommend it. I've been doing it for a number of years. Anyway, I'll move on. This week in the gym, it is, by the time the show comes out, it will be almost the end of Hell Week. For those of you that have done it, I hope that you've had fun. For those of you that haven't done it or that do not live in the country, so cannot do it, I encourage you to put together your own Hell Week every now and again. We do it twice a year here at the gym, where we have 5 days of super tough workouts just to push you a little bit further, both mentally and physically. Talking about pushing a little bit further, something that is on the horizon at the end of May, Into the Darkness. You might have seen this over on social media. They'll definitely be talking about it on the InnerFight Endurance podcast. 50-kilometer ride, 50-kilometer run, 50-kilometer ride on the last weekend of May, basically. It's the same weekend that I will actually be in Italy taking part in Steelman, which is a 24-hour event, which I might actually do a whole show on, either before or after. Let me know if you'd like to hear about that. If you want to challenge yourself in the night in an endurance event, doesn't matter whether you do endurance or not, this is a super cool one. Give them a shout, endurance@innerfight.com, and they will give you the information that you need to get involved in that. Finally, from here at the gym, people that are having issues with their hands, I want to speak to you. People, CrossFit people that have issues with their hands, we have and this is not a sales pitch, this is actually to help you. You will have to buy something, but it will help you. We have a load of products available from the WOD guys at the front desk, which is everything from what's called gymnastics grips, which protect your hands and also give you more grip on the bar when you're doing pull-ups. So actually make a pull-up and a toast bar a little bit easier, down to hand care protection, callus cutters. Yes, you should cut calluses off. I think I did a show on calluses once, long time ago, the way that a callus continues to grow. Anyway, that's a long announcement. There is a lot of stuff down there that will actually protect your hands and make you perform the gymnastics movements on the bars a lot better. Go check it out. Lots of good products. They're not that expensive either, so take it easy. That is the announcements for this week. I hope that you guys have had an awesome week. Please do take a minute, rate and review the podcast. This is episode number 803 of the InnerFight podcast with Olly Higgens. No matter where you are in the world, thanks a lot for tuning in. Let's jump into today's show. Olly, here we go. A topic that I'm sure everyone wants to hear about. Mate, we're gonna kick straight into it.
Yeah.
What makes us give up? Let's answer it in the first 5 seconds, and then we can.
I guess as soon as you start to get to a position where whatever you're doing doesn't make sense compared to where you want to get to, you start to raise questions, right? So for me, I think it's a question of what you're doing in the short term, perhaps versus where you thought it was, where it was going to be, and then perhaps is it taking you where you thought you wanted to go?
So when the purpose of the exercise is lost or not clear,
perhaps, yeah. Or I think that's because sometimes it's a question of how you thought it was going to go.
Yeah.
And I think that's also where it starts to get a little interesting, right?
Here we go.
Because it's a question of what was your expectation?
Yeah.
You know? And then it's a question of what are you feeling at that point?
Yeah.
And perhaps it's also a question of how do you think you're going to feel if you continue to do what you're doing?
Let's hit the first one first.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about expectations, mate. We hear this a lot, setting them, managing them, people's expectations not being met. Run us through your thoughts on expectations.
It's a tough one. And I think in order to do it, firstly, you've got to understand the limitations of it. And you've got to understand that perhaps there's a positive side to it, but there's also potentially a negative side to it.
Yeah.
And easily we kind of are drawn perhaps sometimes to quantifying our expectations. You want to hit a certain distance, you want to hit a certain time. But quite often you can also perhaps set your expectations in terms of things that are perhaps harder to measure in terms of a feeling. Or in terms of, are you doing your best? Are you getting to a point where you're actually reaching a limit? Those are all ways of thinking about expectations, and they can all kind of take you in different paths, perhaps.
You're a father.
Yeah.
One thing that I remember when I was young is we were told to do our best, which is what you mentioned there.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that under this theme of expectations?
Yeah.
How do you manage, because I'm sure you tell your kids, just do your best.
Yes, you do.
Do you or don't you?
You do, and it's a tricky one because I think that I've often been brought up with the idea of, fine, do your best, but it's about results. So there's a fine line, right, between you say, you tried your best, and that kind of line gets rolled out sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that the key point that I find quite interesting about this whole subject is that the only person that can tell whether you actually tried your best is yourself. No one else can ever judge you on that, really. Yeah. So it's trying to figure that out for yourself, and then it's how you tie those things together between the idea of what is an effort, how does that relate to your best effort, and then how does that relate to your results. And those can take you in kind of different paths, and some of them can kind of lead you to stopping short, perhaps. You know, if you're not getting the result, but you feel that you're trying your best, or you feel that you're trying your best, and different things are coming out of it that you didn't perhaps expect, you know?
Let's try and tie it to your sports performance. Obviously, mate, you've been on what I would say is a super interesting. I think from what I've seen, your athletic journey has actually been more of a journey of absolute self-discovery, which I think it is for a lot of people. Yeah. How do you tie that measure of effort that you said, where we're often dictated to by numbers, be it in the gym downstairs, how much you can put on the bar, how many pull-ups you can do unbroken, take it into what I think you started running and then went quickly to triathlon and then to ultra cycling, which I'm excited to get to as well.
Correct.
Where a good place to start with it is, what was effort and your best, and how was it measured at the start, and maybe how's it changed?
It's a good question, because I think that when you start getting into endurance, having come from like a team background, playing sports, cricket particularly, you weren't really used to looking at things like pace, power, stuff like that. And then you come into this position where you've got loads of data. And actually, for a while, you have to learn how to use the data, and it's a useful process. And then you perhaps go a little bit too far with that, and you forget what it means to be 7 out of 10 versus 9 out of 10. And how does that change within your first hour compared to your 6th hour or your 12th hour or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So there's part of a process then of actually then being very honest with yourself about what you can do and what you can't do. And I think from my perspective, what I found over those last 5 years through that period is that you start to realize what is your true effort and what is your mind thinking about what you perhaps should be doing, and judging your effort as a relation to what your numbers are putting out.
Yeah.
Which sometimes can be part of the confusing factor, I think, where people are thinking, well, I should be here. And that's perhaps actually maybe your ego thinking you should be able to hold a certain power for a certain period of time, whatever it is. In reality, maybe you can't. That's where it starts to get interesting.
And I mean, that links back to the expectation, really, isn't it? It's like you've come into it, or you see certain things, so you have this... I like what you said about ego there, mate, because a lot of it is ego. It's like, well, I should be able to do this.
Can be. And I think that when I started from going shorter distance to longer distance, there's definitely an element of ego at play, because you're still looking at numbers and you're still thinking, well, you know, how far can I go? And if you go 300K, 400K, 500, you know, at some point it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah.
Really, for anybody else. No one else cares like you care, right? But at the same time...
so good.
Right? But at the same time, you're still chasing that. And if for some reason you can't hit a certain number, you start to become affected by that. You might start to become disinterested by it. It might start to take you away from your original purpose. And that's therefore then maybe a false expectation. Or maybe it's an expectation set on a false premise, because it's being driven by something that actually doesn't serve you like it should do.
That actually links us super fast back to what we said at the start, that now the purpose has been removed, and that's the point at which we simply just give up.
Well, I think that's key. Yeah. That is key, because you start to get to that stage, and depending on what you're doing and how long a period you're in a certain amount of discomfort for.
Yeah. Now we're moving to the nice place.
then unless that is really strong, in terms of that reason, unless that reason is strong enough, then it's far easier to start to listen to the narrative which always comes, which is, why are you doing this? This is hard. It's only going to get harder, you know. And that narrative just probably gets louder and louder the longer you sit in that space.
Where does that narrative come from, mate?
I guess part of it is from that original expectation, perhaps. Is where you thought you may have been. Whether you consciously are predicting, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, or if not, still you might be pushing yourself to a position you've not been before. And therefore you're naturally pulling things back to a point that you're more familiar with. So if you're past your limit, if you've done something which is longer or harder than you've done before, naturally you'll be trying to pull it back to where you were when something else happened to you that was hard. And if it gets harder, then what do you do with it? How do you react in that position? And then the next thing is then you start to project it forwards. You know, what's going to happen if I feel like this now? How on earth am I going to feel in 4 hours' time? Right? I've still got to do
or 30
X, Y,
seconds.
and Z, or exactly, or 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where it starts to get really interesting, because it's about taking stuff from the past, taking stuff from the future, and, you know, we're not so good actually about projecting accurately in reality. And that ties back into then thinking, well, do I keep going with this thing that I'm doing if it's going to make me feel in such a way at some point in the future?
Folks, we're less than 10 minutes in. This might feel a bit heavy, but I think it's something that's... And I think one of the problems with it, mate, is that it's probably quite... Like, we're talking about the past, we're talking about the future and this thing, and that application to daily life is a lot easier. The word I'm looking for that I've just found is theoretical. Yeah. There's a lot of theoretical things as to why we actually start and as to why we stop. However, and I'm interested to get your opinion on this, mate. You've obviously, over the last, of your life, got closer, more in touch with the theoretical side. That's why you're able to put it over in the way that you have so far. That's a process, though.
Yes.
Because you now understand, like, we were all, and I was probably one of the worst, and I'll put my hand up, and I often do, slave to the data.
Yeah.
You know, and you said it, like, what's the difference between 300 Ks and 350 Ks on the bike?
Yes.
Nobody has any measure of what 300 is. So
No,
if you
sure.
do 350, they don't care either.
No.
But it's your ego wants to say 350. So what is it, mate? And are there, like, can you think of any sort of points in your life that stuff started to click? Like, when did you start not really caring about heart rate data, for example?
Only relatively recently,
Yeah.
to be honest. And only when you go longer.
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about the ultra side of it, because I think a lot of the good stuff can happen there because it's for an extended period of time, and because there's less distractions, you tend to find more about yourself perhaps in those periods of time. But the good thing about it is that it's completely applicable to what you do on a day-to-day basis.
100%.
And I think that the difference is that it's easier to become aware of these things in certain scenarios than it is in day-to-day life.
Yes.
But in reality, the thing still plays out and affects, because all we're talking about when you're talking about giving up is effectively decision making. That's all it is. It's just a question of, are you making a decision one way or the other, and are you doing it then perhaps under fatigue or under a certain amount of discomfort? But it's the same in your day-to-day life, and people will make decisions all the way through their day based on the level of discomfort or fatigue that they have.
Yeah.
And I tell you what I really like about it is actually that the way that your mind works and your narrative perhaps goes around a decision is that it will always try and find the route that's best for you. Right? So you
That's
can always...
interesting, right?
So, but what will happen is if you say, right, I'm going to give you a situation where you have to make a decision.
Yeah.
And say it's all theoretical for the sake of argument now, and you do it in... I'll give you the situation in 12 hours time, and you think about it, and you can probably make quite a rational decision right now. But if you do it under a certain load, your decision can be quite different. And that can happen just because it's a Friday and it's the end of a long week, as opposed to the decision you make on a Monday when perhaps you're rested, just in your day-to-day life. So the process is still similar, even if the stressor is different.
So therefore, to be in touch with our decision-making process is actually the key.
Yeah, and I think it's essential to any form of performance.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's any form of high performance, if that's in business or family life or sports or anything, unless you're making good decisions on a very consistent basis, that's going to define how you perform over the long term, right, in anything.
When people make both good and bad decisions, because and there is a difference, right? There's a good decision, there's a bad decision, and there's a decision that the consequences are neither good nor bad. They just kind of roll with it.
Yeah.
Do you think people spend enough time reflecting on the results of a good decision and the results of a bad decision?
I think no, in short. And I think that because people don't necessarily realize that all the decisions that you're making all have a consequence. So the same process that applies to a life-changing decision, such as changing career or moving countries or whatever, people will reflect on those decisions a lot.
Yes.
Perhaps too much.
Yeah.
But they won't necessarily reflect on what they do on a day-to-day basis. Do you go to the gym 5 times a week, or did you put the work in when it actually really got tough, or did you actually just postpone the meeting to the following day because you had a little bit of extra time? And actually, you know what? By 2 days' time, it'll long be gone.
Yeah.
And everything will be totally fine because it wasn't on deadline and it's not an issue.
Yeah.
But in reality, what you've done is you've built a process of just postponing something, perhaps because you weren't up for it. And that can compound over time, right?
It's interesting because I actually think we spend a disproportionate amount of time pondering why we made bad decisions compared to why we made good decisions.
Yeah.
And let's put it into a sporting context, or it could be a work context, but if you pull out of a race, you'll spend hours, if you care, which we're presuming most people do, you'll spend hours, literally what a phrase we'd hear often, doing your head in
Yes.
about why you pulled out.
Yes.
If that race goes perfectly to plan, you made a lot of good decisions at the right times that got you the result that you wanted. You just presume that that's okay.
Yes.
Whereas that's also a behavior of learning our decision-making process.
Yeah.
So why aren't we need to spend as much time? It's like working on strengths or weaknesses, isn't it? We should be spending as much time when a sporting event or a business deal goes really well, debunking it, doing our head in as to why it went so well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that we can then sort of retrain or continue to train that decision-making process.
Yes, I agree totally. Because like I said, I think that once you start to think about certain things, it's not a formulaic approach to decision making, but I think that there's definitely a pattern that you can start to think about when you approach your decisions, and you can analyze that on a relatively small scale and start to repeat it. So your positive decisions that you're making on a day-to-day basis, perhaps you've been doing it for so long that it's just become second nature, but you may well be struggling with something else. So you've got to think about how was that built? How did you create that process in the first place? And how do you then start to apply it to other areas? So exactly that, taking those good elements and then start to think about how the big one, perhaps that got away, right? You may well just be stronger, therefore, in the future as to how you're going to tackle the next issue.
So tell us a little bit, mate, about how this is applied, or these things, linking it to your journey in endurance sports, because I've watched kind of not from afar, but from the back row, and it's been really interesting to see your development. So I'm interested to hear about it, why it's moved in the way it's moved, and how you've seen things.
Well, I guess part of it is when you start doing long distance cycling, there's not many events, right? So if you're in the world of triathlon or shorter term races, then I guess it's perhaps a little bit easier to be considering numbers on a more frequent basis, because you're looking for a time. And in order to get to a time, you need to think about certain power and certain splits and stuff like that. Whereas if you're just going to go and ride your bike for a long time, like there's no even fixed courses. It's just a question of what you can cover in a certain period of time or over a weekend or whatever. And I think that once you start to do that, you take away the boundaries of the situation. It means that the data doesn't really apply as much. And I did one thing which was, in hindsight, was actually probably really helpful, which was to do a bit of a tour around Northern Emirates. And it wasn't, like you had a route, but there were elements that weren't prescribed. So what ended up happening was that when you got to those decision points, which is say Jebel Jais, how many times you're going to go up and down it, if it was a fixed 3, for the sake of argument, then it's kind of black and white, fail or don't fail. But if it's not, how do you judge it? And you can't judge that on power.
This is a super... Tell a story about this one, mate, because it's actually in my notes to ask you, so it's good that you've come to it. So you set out, carry on.
So I did a ride from Al Qudra in Dubai, with Jebel Jais as being the furthest point away, the turning point, if you like, and it was the long way. So we went via Shoka, Hatta, Kalba, Fujairah across, got to Jais. The idea was to do at least one rep and then come back a different way, but also kind of a long way. By the time I got to Jais, I was struggling. I was hurting probably more than I thought I was hurting.
How far had you ridden?
Probably about 400 Ks in that day.
Solid.
But the issue wasn't, it was physical, of course it was physical, but it was really the stress of, I think, riding on the roads, thinking about things that you hadn't thought about before. Like purposely, I hadn't checked every part of the course out because I wanted to have surprises.
Adventure.
None of them were, exactly. That was part of the attraction. But then you get to it and you think, these are not positive surprises, right? So by the time you get there, you're more fatigued than I thought I was going to be at that point. And I'd never been, by that point, that was probably the furthest I'd been in terms of, not in distance terms, but from a mental perspective, in terms of the status that I was at that stage, I was out of my limit, or whatever I'd done in the past. And there was a point when you come from Masafi through to Ras Al Khaimah, so you go back across the Hajar Mountains, and then you're going into Ras Al Khaimah city for resupply. I think it's about 80 Ks.
Right.
And that was pretty dark because it was physically getting dark. I'd left my light in Hatta, stupidly. I had a head torch as a front light.
Yeah.
And I hadn't figured out that through Masafi, that's where all those crushers, the rock crushers and the quarries and all that kind of stuff is. And I hit it at about 6 o'clock. And it was just full of trucks, and there was rubbish on the road, and it was just miserable. And this is where the narrative then starts. How many reps are you going to do with Jace? You know, and it's like it goes from 1 through to you feeling good. I'm going to do 5, and then you're feeling rubbish. Oh, there's a hotel in Ras Al Khaimah city. Maybe you just crashed there, and then you start to then almost you can't do anything about it because you're still riding, and then you start to just hear the narrative over and over again, and it's kind of then an interesting process to see or hear what's the story, because it's almost like you've got the side of you which is saying, keep going, you're not even halfway yet, what are you talking about? And then the other side going, yeah, but this is harder than you thought, it's not perhaps as safe as you thought, it's definitely not very comfortable, all those kind of things going on at that stage.
When you set out, what did you set out to do?
I think that in part there was a certain distance and there was an elevation, right? So that you have something in mind to frame it, right? So it was similar to what you might find at a biking man or something like that. That was kind of the idea, but at the time it was COVID and these events were cancelled. So that was the very first idea, was to just go and do something that you would have perhaps done in an event, should an event have been on. Yeah. But after that, then it was really just a question of go find your limit, go explore, go to places in the UAE that you haven't been to before, go and experience them on a bike as opposed to just driving past them. And then that's where you get the softer side of it almost, which is like the less quantifiable side of things. Yeah. And then really it was about challenging yourself, you know, and being out on your own, you know, and because I remember you said to me like, look, I can drive behind you. Which is really kind, by the way, thanks. but there was part I didn't want that because I wanted to see what happens when no one's looking. Yeah. And that's very cool. And that's quite a big thing, I think, because I knew that having someone like yourself or someone else there influences how you make decisions. Of course. And influences your own narrative. Even if you're saying, look, don't talk to me, and obviously that wouldn't be an issue. You're just not saying it. Yeah. You know that someone's watching and it's influencing your process, as opposed to just being completely isolated almost and say, okay, well, this is really hard. Yeah. How's that going to play out? You know? It's interesting, mate, because, and I actually wrote about it after Rackman, you know, why do I make events? Yeah. They're not even events. Why do I go out and do stuff on my own? Yeah. You know, and I don't know, I process it quite a lot, not because I'm not that worried about what people think. I used to be when I was younger, but now I don't really care. Yeah. I think once you've run or your face is on Burj Khalifa with a crop top on, you kind of get over what people think about you. Maybe that's ego playing out in itself, you know, but it's a really interesting one because when there's 70.3 at the beach track, you know when you're going to get water, you're going to get lifted up by those people. And, you know, I actually do the same sometimes. Like Carlin gives us a disproportionate amount of his time and cares like insanely about our safety. Yeah. But sometimes I'm just like, mate, can you just see me in 5K or see me in 10K? And he's really good. He's like, he'll leave if it's safe. But if he deems it not safe, he'll just say yes and just stay behind. But it creates this, what you just explained, it creates this zone where you are actually like, you're 100% in charge of everything. Yes. I don't consider in a race, you're not 100% in charge of anything. No, I agree. You're almost, you're not in the slipstream, but you're in the slipstream. Well, the thing is that you don't have a decision to make. Yeah. Well, really, because your decision is literally stop. Or go. Or just continue. Which then becomes quite a simple decision if you're relatively well trained and you're just determined to do something. Like it's a simpler decision. It's not easy, right? Yeah. Necessarily, because you can obviously push it, but it's not as complicated as then having multiple decisions in that kind of situation,
Yeah.
which I think is different. It's not to take it away from anything, but it is a different thing.
I think they're very different, mate, and that's actually one of the points that I think that's why I've brought it up, because that's one of the points. I don't think one's right or one's wrong.
No.
I think to believe that we're all going to achieve what we want and get the same thing out of one format of race is a little bit delusional, because we're all so different.
Yes.
So
Yes.
100 people can do a marathon and they're all going to feel different. Some of them are not going to feel it's very hard from the point of signing up to it to the sort of post, debrief. They're not going to feel anything, whereas some people are going to feel a lot.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's why I'm always interested when people come with different races as to why they're starting to resonate.
Yes.
But we're not, like, you hear people talking about things that they find in marathons and in Ironman, and I see people just looking at them going, and they just have no clue what they're talking about. And it's the same, like someone will listen to you talking about sort of what you went out to find out there, and they probably just can't even resonate with it. But that's because we're all so different.
Yeah, and it depends what you're after, because
Yeah.
I think that you can do an Ironman and it can serve a purpose to getting you more disciplined, to getting you in better shape, to building better habits. All those things are great for a whole host of reasons other than just hitting a certain time in an Ironman. But if you're looking for something perhaps a little bit different in terms of challenging yourself on a different mental level, then these alternative races, or they're not races, but alternative events or adventures can provide, that perhaps for you.
I know more people that have gone through more traditional routes on endurance, such as probably you and I, and actually entered races and done distances and then moved to it. I don't know many people that have come from weird made-up races, if you want to call them that, or made-up challenges, and then come into the narrower, more commercial sort of specified events.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I think it's a different thing. So it might even just be a completely different character that seeks these things out.
Yeah, maybe.
For me personally, I think, to be honest, if there were events on that were more aligned with what I wanted to do, that probably would have been my first port of call anyway.
Right. So you never really loved triathlon?
I enjoyed it, but I wasn't... say you're not doing it for the sport of triathlon might be a bit different, but I was doing it for the pursuit of, of fitness and pushing yourself from an endurance perspective, and finding out about new things and learning new skills and all the other bits and pieces that came with it. And there's an element that I miss about it still, because I still had really fond memories of all the training in particularly, and even the event itself. But then I think things changed, and like I say, then having come and stumbled into something else when you had no events available to you, that's when a different part of your brain started thinking. And I think you can do it on the bike, because it's a question of, it started for me with thinking, well, I'm going to go from Lisbon to the Algarve, and I thought, well, I'm going to have to hire a car, or I'm going to have to fly. And then you look on the map and you go, it's 300 Ks or something. It's like, well, I did 150 of the weekend, maybe I'll just take my bike. So that was like a paradigm shift from a sport to more of a just like, I can go and explore that whole coastline that I've never been to before. That would be cool. Let's go check that out. And then once that thread started, then it's like, well, where else can I ride? What else can I cover?
So your triathlon time and your swim times, all the splits, they motivated you, but they weren't really the be all and end all, were they?
No,
that's what I'm getting.
No, not at all. What was good though was that there was things like swimming, for instance, which I was terrible at to start with. And then you put in the time and the graft, and actually you saw performance, and so you learn the lesson through doing just something that's difficult. It doesn't matter if it's swimming or if it's something else. It's just purely just application, and then consistency, and then seeing progress. There's something big out of just that, because you apply that obviously everywhere as well.
There's one sort of quote that as you get older, your ability to go faster, or something along these lines, your ability to go faster declines, so you have to go longer to keep achieving.
Yeah.
How does that sit with you, mate?
Makes sense. I think it does make sense. Obviously, from a physical perspective, I think that's clear.
Yeah.
And I think from a mental perspective, as you're learning about things and you start to then come back to that idea of how you make decisions, and you become better at making decisions.
Yeah.
And you come back into the whole subject of actually giving up or not giving up, and that's what a lot of these longer format events really come down to. Then it makes sense that you can excel in those particular type of events, even if you're older, because it's not just about maximum power output over a short period of time. It's about less time off the bike or whatever it is.
Or I can only push 200 watts, but I can push it for 2,000 Ks.
Yeah, happy days, you're a champion, right?
Something like that. Like that's what you start to dream of.
Yeah.
So, mate, let's just hop back. We reached Jebel Jais.
Yeah.
Continue the story.
So I think that, like I say, so when the narrative starts, and it starts for me in terms of saying, well, you're feeling in this way at the moment, how are you going to feel in the future? So I got to the base of Jebel Jais. I felt terrible, but set up camp, had all the food, everything was all sorted.
Yeah.
Slept for a couple of hours, started again in the morning. And then again, obviously, the body feels terrible. And what you see is that, well, what I saw anyway, was that you have the idea of saying, well, how on earth are you going to get up the mountain, or let alone do it like 3 times, how are you going to do it one time? But you continue to go. So that voice quietens down a little bit. And then over a period of time, the voice will come back again, and it will start to question, okay, well, what if you can only do 1.5 reps? How would that make you feel? You know, because the idea of obviously not doing a complete rep, that's completely alien. Like, why would you ever, you know? So that starts to sit, and that starts to fester a little bit, and then time continues, and you're still riding, and then the thought comes back, and well, what happens if you then turn around and you have to go back, but you have to abandon somewhere that wasn't back to Al Qudra? How would that make you feel? You start to realize how this narrative is going, and this is not just in 30 seconds. This is obviously over the course of 12 hours. This is pretty much playing out, and the narrative. What I find interesting is that the narrative changes. It's almost like a line comes to you, and you bat it away, and then the brain inside of you thinks again and comes up with a different attack route. What about this?
Yeah.
And you bat it away, and then it comes up with another one. What about this? And then that's where it's starting to find your weak points, what really matters to you, and then which are the kind of the trigger points that is going to start to make you think about, actually, you know what, maybe this isn't the best idea. Maybe I should actually stop, you know? And it could just be your, you know, this kind of self-protection, you know, the central governor or whatever it is that's going, look, your body is really in a world of pain here. You've got to protect yourself a little bit. I don't really believe that much for me in that particular circumstance. I don't think it was that. I think it's more about protecting your ego. And I think that the points that got me, for instance, I ended up doing 1 repetition and then changing my plan, because I thought really I should have probably done 2 or 3, but did 1 and then go back. And the line that kind of stuck with me was, 1, what happens if you only do 1.5 reps? Or what happens if you have to stop midway through a rep? And I couldn't comprehend stopping partway through doing something like that. And then the other one is, what happens if you have to abandon partway through? So that was kind of getting me in terms of I think I had some kind of fear of failing in such a, what would be like a bigger way, you know? But then what kind of sunk it, if you like, was to say, well, what happens if you reframed it, you do 1 repetition, and then you get back within 48 hours from when you set off. And this is like carrot and stick, right? And this is, so your thinking then is, in terms of your own process, is thinking, well, actually then you've got an achievement out of this that you weren't thinking of before. So you see how the brain is almost like kind of taken this fear, it's finally found a fear that resonates with you, and now it's giving you like a big achievement, only if you stop now though. And then at that point in time, not only I reached the summit, I came back down a little bit, had a coffee, called the missus and said, you know, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to come back. I'm going to try and make it back within 48 hours. So not only I kind of backed off what I think I probably originally thought should have been the plan, which was 2 or 3 reps, I was happy about it. Like I'd come into that situation thinking, you know what, this is a good decision now.
Yeah.
And now this is going to be a good goal to get it back. And that's kind of where I went forward with it. So that whole process, when I sat and thought about it afterwards, was one, how the narrative builds upon itself and finds these points of weakness until it kind of finds one that it can lock into.
Yeah.
And 2, how you can think of something that was a good decision when in reality it wasn't what you wanted at the start, and it wasn't what you wanted when you reflect back on it. And then that starts to make you think about how often do you make other decisions that you think are right in the time, but perhaps actually they were just easier at the time. Yeah.
Do you think though, in that scenario, all that you're actually trying to do is find something that made sense and gave you purpose in that moment?
Yeah, I think you were looking for something that was positive.
Yeah.
Because at the time you were staring down, not achieving what you wanted to achieve. So when you have,
but you didn't really know what you wanted to achieve.
Not really.
Aside from go out and have some good fun.
True, but I think I still knew that I should have been doing more than 1 rep.
Did you know, or did your ego know?
Well, this is the point, right? Because
Yeah,
you think,
totally,
well, what's
mate.
it for?
Yeah.
And that was the other thing that as part of the conversation that was going through my mind was to test this ego thing out, because in the planning stage, it's so easy to get run away with the numbers, and you start thinking, oh, geez, I'll just go and do 9 reps, and then you start thinking, no, look, bring this back. It's not about the ego; it's about the purity of the challenge and whatever else.
Yeah.
And actually, that was part of the narrative that kind of pulled me off, to say the only reason you're doing 3 reps is probably for your ego anyway.
Yeah, totally.
And that could easily be true, but at the same time, I think it was also making me afraid that I was going to abandon Endeavour, and that was also for my ego. So maybe I could have done 3 reps and still done that. I don't know. And that's kind of the beauty of it, is that I think that because it's not fixed, it's not black and white. And there's still a part of you which thinks, was that exactly right? Could I have pushed a bit further? I don't know.
It's super interesting, because I actually believe kind of where I was edging there on it, in that the brain starts, or we are the brain is within us, starts to put together what's actually going to be meaningful and give us purpose. And because we are a little bit, like, we can resonate with numbers. Yes, they're not the be all and end all, but we can resonate with them. If we can attach a number and attach some meaning, then we attach purpose. And when we have purpose, we don't stop.
Yes.
You know, and it's, mate, again, another example from Rackman. We were literally coming up the last climb on the run. It was a hike and amble or whatever it was at this stage, and we're like, shit, if we get moving, like if we go a little bit quicker, we'll actually get this done by midnight. But there was never a goal to finish by midnight, and midnight meant nothing. It wasn't a certain number of hours, but once we saw on the watch, the brain clicked in, and it was like, yeah, let's go. I
think that's because you're naturally driven towards some form of achievement, some form of measure, and I think that you sometimes attach some form of importance to achieving stuff like that. So it comes back to yourself and thinking, there's an element of self-importance that you did a certain thing, even if it's unrelatable to a lot of people. There's still that element where you think, well, how much are you doing that to your own self-worth because you did X, Y, and Z? Which is interesting because it can be used certainly as a short-term motivational tool to push yourself through a particular limit.
I mean, it is, mate. It's breaking things up. It's 1K left. Okay, it's 10 to 12. You know, we'll get this done by 12. It's 10 minutes to go. You know, and the fact that actually it didn't change the overall time and that there was no goal, but it just, in that moment, it just had this amazing amount of...
It gives you an energy, right?
Of meaning and of energy, mate. One thing that you said or you alluded to was, and I've spoken about it before on the show, and it's probably not new to a lot of people, is what Simon Sinek talks a lot about, the infinite game. And there isn't really, like, where is the end of this stuff? Like, that bike ride went on for as long as it was supposed to go on for. But when you set out, it was actually, you'd entered an infinite game. Because there was no end point. how do you, like, a lot of people are thinking like, this guy's nuts. He just went, like, at least, mate, when we rode back from Jebel Jace, we knew we were coming near to the gym. And like, but you're playing this, you were playing an infinite game.
Well, I think that's where it's interesting. Well, I find it particularly interesting, right? Because it's not black and white. And that was one of the first thoughts that I had, that was, if it was a prescribed course, then that whole narrative would have been way simpler.
Yeah.
But because it's not, it's far more applicable to what you do on a day-to-day basis. Because there's so many decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis that are not black and white, that don't have massive immediate repercussions that you can say, that was good, that was bad, therefore you reflect upon. So it's far more applicable in some instances, in some contexts from that perspective then.
When is the next infinite game, or does the next game have a...
I mean, I'm doing Corsica, I'm doing a Biking Man event in Corsica in end of May, first week in June. And I'm interested to see, because from a distance perspective and an elevation perspective, it's far more than I've done before, but it doesn't have that element in terms of decision making, because it's fixed route, and it's just get around as quickly as you can. So I'm really looking forward to that. But I think that through this whole process of finding these different routes and finding these different ways to challenge yourself, then there's a whole load more stuff that you can do. And I think that it doesn't necessarily need to be really long distances on the bike.
Right.
You can definitely do it in other formats. And I think you can think about it in your day-to-day life in terms of just when you're making a decision, just have that level of awareness of what is the narrative. And especially if you find yourself turning back on a commitment that you'd made, small or big, it's then just start to think about, well, why is that happening? Why am I thinking like this? Why am I thinking that it's okay to postpone it to tomorrow? In fact, why am I thinking it might even be better for me to postpone it until tomorrow? Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm just giving myself an easy option, and I'm just telling a really good story about it, because I bet that happens. It happens a lot to me, I think.
Yeah.
And I think it happens to a lot of people. But you just see, well, that's just what happens. I'm not going to the gym today. I'm going to go in the morning. Actually, that makes more sense, because I've got to get up early and do X, Y, and Z. Immediately, you've just bailed on a decision. Yeah. But it made sense, and it's a good decision in that moment, right?
So it's a lot of creating awareness around decision-making, around purpose, which really is leading us to the point of whether a decision that we have to make is giving up or not giving up. And
yes, I think that's it. I think it comes back to that process.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of similarities between the process that happens when you're thinking about going to the gym after work after a hard day.
Yeah.
Why is that different? Why is that decision different on a Friday to a Monday? Right? Same decision.
Yeah.
And then thinking about finding other ways to put yourself into hard situations where you can listen to the narrative. Like, don't get distracted by other things and just sit in it for a minute.
Yeah.
And just listen to it. But I mean, riding your bike long distances is a really good way to do that, I think, because there's just no distractions and you don't have many choices other than carrying on for a while.
I loved Eddie Jones's book that I think I read it last year. And one thing he said in there, which I thought I could use in this show, and now I've come to the point where I can use it. He says, character in the form of grit, dedication, and the ability to perform under pressure matters more than pure talent.
Yeah.
We've not once spoken in the last 45 minutes about your cycling background, the fact that you're an incredible cyclist or not. All of this is actually character.
Yeah, and I think that's what got me interested in this in the first place, even from when I was a child playing sports, because I was always fascinated by, playing against them and with people that had different levels of talent, and trying to figure out why certain people would perform, in clutch moments and other people wouldn't. Why is that person performing to the limit of their ability, and why is this person not? And is that a talent itself, or where does that come from? So that is exactly what it's all about, really. And I think when you talk about high performance, again, in terms of being a parent or being a business owner or whatever it is, it's the same threads that come through again, right? And it's character, it's perseverance, and it's continuing to drive forwards and be curious about these things, as opposed to any innate ability to to do a certain skill first time you do it. Doesn't actually count for that much in the long term. And I think that's why when it clicked really well for me, and it was locked back in because I used to do it a lot when I was younger, did it through business for a while, and then the last 5 years I've kind of found it again just through endurance, and it's not about the bike, right? I don't feel necessarily like a cyclist as such. It's just it's a vehicle, not a physical vehicle, but it's like it's a medium, if you like, to get to that position where you can start to test character, you can build character through it, and you can find difficult positions at the end of the day.
Does it come, is the crossover from life to the sport, or from the sport to life, or is it a mishmash of all of them? Because a lot of people will ask what do you learn? What can you put into life? What can you put from business to there? But I feel that, well, answer that question, because I feel that your answer is going to be a little bit different.
I feel it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Because it's a question of your process. It's a question of your, like you say, it's a question of your character and how you approach a certain thing. It doesn't matter to me whether it's difficult on a cricket pitch or in a boardroom or on a bike or in a family situation. We all have situations where we want to perhaps shy away from them because they're difficult.
Yeah.
And we have situations that we run towards them because we think we're good at them. And you know you're going to be able to knock up an achievement in them because you're relatively strong in that particular situation. That applies across the board, I think. And that's why I think you can, in the first instance, I would take sports lessons into a career in business. And now you're taking business into sports again, but now I'm also taking the sports that I'm doing back into business and through the family. So for me, it's just, it's all the same.
Why do you think then, I'm sort of setting you up for this, mate, not to fail at it, but why are we always trying to separate them?
In what way?
Well, we talk about lessons in sport.
Right.
And then we talk about lessons in business. And,
Yeah. I guess people identify with things in compartments.
Yeah.
I personally have quite, if I find a problem, I'll break it down into its components and I'll try and build it back up. Mm-hmm. Now, that works some of the time, but actually it doesn't work in some instances where you have to see the whole problem. But when, as humans, I think you have a complex issue, we're hardwired to try and break it down into individual components, address it and then plug it back together and then kind of move on. So if people think about a business problem, they may also just identify as a business person and they think, okay, well, that's relevant for me. I can apply that because I'm a business person. In reality, some of the stuff that you'll teach or you'll learn out of a business seminar could be very similar to what you'd learn out of a sports management or a coaching seminar as well.
Yeah.
When you're talking about man management or, people relations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's very, very similar, actually.
I think it is. And I think that's actually, if we understand why we give up in certain areas, there's so much, it's all one.
Yes.
It's all one.
Yes.
I give up on bits of work when I don't see what you said at the top of the show, when I don't really see any purpose.
Yeah, and I think
can't connect it.
I think at some point it's not okay to give up because we think that giving up has got a negative nature.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, everyone's given up on something like an international sports career or whatever it is, and you've let it go because it's not serving your purpose anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And that's totally fine. It happens in relationships, it happens in business. It's not completely negative.
Yeah.
I think it applies to so many different things.
Yeah.
That I think that's the reason why it's really important to understand the process of it, and that to come back to that narrative of it. Are you spinning a narrative where you're walking out of that situation thinking you made the right decision?
Yeah.
And did you actually make the right decision?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Because it could be the right decision. It could be that piece of work was actually distracting you from what you should have been doing, which is your primary
100%.
focus, right?
100%.
But it could also just be that actually it was just getting a bit tough and you were a bit tired.
And I mean, I guess that's a whole other show as well, mate, is that we've spoken a lot about why we give up. We haven't talked a lot about what you sort of touched on there of there's actually some huge positives of stopping.
Yes.
Certain things.
Yes.
It probably served you in the best way with the example we spoke about to just do what you did on Jebel Jais, spin round and make it home in that new timeline that gave you purpose, which was 48 hours.
Possibly.
It probably felt, you've probably had mixed emotions then, and you probably get them now, but that was actually a really smart thing to do.
Yeah.
It wasn't, you hadn't, and that's why I don't actually see that, like, it's not a give up, but if we took it as to where your brain was at, that it could be 3, it could be 5, you actually gave up on those, but you actually made a super smart decision. And like you said, that piece of work that I got into, it could have just been distracting me, or this is actually, you know, it's prolonging an injury and slowing down my recovery if I keep going now. And it's so interlinked with everything else you said, is that it's probably just in that moment the ego that's just destroying you. You just don't want to lose.
Exactly. And I mean, at the end of the day, you have to be able to be ruthless with your decisions, to stop doing stuff, to give up on things, right? In order to focus, in order to prioritize, and to simplify the elements that you really want to go hard on. You have to be able to do that. So there's a skill in giving up, right? Because at the end of the day, it just comes back to the fact that it's just a decision. And it's how good are you at making a decision, and how good are you at making a decision when you're under fatigue. That's really the crux of it, and that's why it applies across so many different points, really.
Mate, absolutely brilliant. I won't take any more of your time or your decision making or your brain power, but that's a great conversation, and definitely one I'll listen back to a couple of times. And people, if you've made it to the end, folks, and you understand a little bit about what we've been talking about, you've done well, because we just go in a few different directions. But mate, thank you very much. It's inspiring, mate. It really is, because it's such a, I don't think it's something new, but the way that you phrase those things, it just makes sense, you know. And to be in touch with the decision-making process, then you won't reach these bad points of a bad failure.
No, and you're learning, right? And you can continue to improve upon it. That's the key point, I think.
Ollie, thank you very much, mate.
Thank you.
Cheers.